So, hello everyone, and welcome to today's local government education program provided by University of Illinois Extension and Rural Partners, the Illinois Rural Development Council. My name is Mike Delaney, and I'm a community and economic development educator for University of Illinois Extension. Today's webinar is entitled Local Food Systems, Potential for Improving Community, Economy, and Health. I'll begin with a quick programming note. Today, after the presenters have shared their materials, we'd like to ask our attendees to join brief breakout sessions to address a few questions that they'll provide. We'd request that a person in each breakout group volunteer to note the top 2 or 3 answers expressed in the course of the discussion of each question. Then after the breakout discussion, we'll return to the main group and review the highlighted concerns. As always, you're welcome at any time to write questions you might have into the Zoom chat space by clicking on the chat icon at the lower center of the Zoom screen. We'll review the questions in a question and answer period following the breakout sessions. I'll remind you that if you're having problems connecting to the webinar, please identify those via the chat space if you can as well, and someone will try to assist you. Finally, please remember that after the conclusion of today's presentation, all participants will receive an email with slides and a link to the recording of the webinar. Now, I'd like to introduce Laura Hepp-Kessel. Laura is the Director of Telehealth Services for Southern Illinois University School of Medicine, and most importantly for today, is also serving as Chair of the Board of Directors for Rural Partners. I'm also pleased to welcome our presenters for today from the University of Illinois. Dr. Hope Michelson is an Associate Professor in the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Economics, and Dr. Joseph Malone is an Extension Specialist in Community and Economic Development. Joseph and Hope will share information about global effects on our food systems, implications of global food security, how communities can build a sustainable community-based food system, and the implications for local economies. Again, please feel free to type questions into the chat space and we'll review them in the brief Q&A when we return from the breakout sessions. We'll now turn the microphone over to Laura.
Thanks, Mike. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I just want to talk about Rural Partners just for a moment. So if you aren't familiar with Rural Partners, we are the state's Rural Development Council. We're a membership organization with a volunteer board, and we have partnered with Extension to offer a webinar series throughout the year. Each month we focus on a different topic. This month's topic is farm, family, agriculture. We're really pleased to have this presentation today. The next in this series will actually be held on Tuesday, March 30th at noon as well. So watch for those emails from Nancy. You can sign up for that webinar when it comes out. And we just want to, again, thank you for coming. I will, in the chat box, include Rural Partners website address in case you're interested in learning more about our organization or joining our organization. And I'm going to pass it on to Nancy. Thank you.
As a land-grant institution, the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign has a responsibility to acknowledge the historical context in which it exists. We are currently on the lands of the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piankashaw, Wea, Miami, Mascoutin, Odawa, Sauk, Meskwaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. It is necessary for us to acknowledge these Native nations and for us to work with them as we move forward as an institution. Over the next 150 years, we will be a vibrant community inclusive of all our differences, with Native peoples at the core of our efforts.
Great, so I will start by giving the sort of big context for the motivation for the work that Joseph and I are starting, and that I think a lot of you are probably thinking about in your own work, which is global food security. And in particular, that we live in a world with enormous inequities in terms of having nearly 1 billion people. The estimates vary, but actually in terms of number of people have been going up worryingly sort of in the last 3 years. So we're at about 850 million people now in the world who don't have enough to eat based on sort of minimum caloric thresholds. And then we have an enormous number of people in the world, and sometimes these populations coexist in the same country, in which people are consuming too much, or there's evidence that people are consuming too much. So that in particular places where we have a high prevalence of obesity in the population. And I teach a really big undergraduate class, and we spend some time talking about this and the certain kinds of complications that this coexistence creates for policies and for food systems, and that's sort of a big motivator for some of the work that we're thinking about. So in particular, we talk about the need and the opportunity. So I study agribusiness, and we think a lot about the sort of coming demand increases and then shifts in food demand that always accompany increases in income. So I think about those as opportunities in the world, because there's real markets that are changing and expanding. So if we're going to have a population of 9 billion, how do we meet that demand? So this is what's nice about this slide, which is from the World Economic Forum a couple of years ago, is that it makes specific some of the particulars of this challenge related to increased demand and changing demand. So we've got these big increases in population in low-income countries in particular, and in middle-income countries. That's where we're seeing a lot of population-driven food demand increases. And there's this interesting thing that's happening, which is not only do we have increasing population, but we have changes in the location of that population. So people are moving from rural areas to urban areas. The world is primarily urban now. We crossed that threshold about 6 years ago, where more people in the world live in urban areas than in rural areas. However, in low-income and middle-income countries are still primarily rural, right? So we're still anticipating this big shift towards the urban in places where population is anticipated to grow the most. So changes in where people live matter a lot, because as people move to urban areas, they tend to have two big changes related to what happens to their food demand. So one is, when you move to urban areas, you tend to be wealthier. So there's new income opportunities in urban areas. Sometimes that drives people to urban areas. Sometimes they're sort of pushed out of rural areas because of other circumstances, and then experience these big income changes once they get to urban areas. And as people get higher incomes, they want a more diversified diet. In particular, they substitute away from staple cereals, and they start eating more fresh fruits and vegetables and more animal source proteins. So that's a big thing that's happening in the world, and that's going to continue to happen in the next 50 years. And then the other thing that happens is that, as urban areas grow, you need to have food systems that can meet the demand of those urban areas. And that creates particular kinds of challenges related to natural resources and land use. So there's these particular kinds of implications that we have to think about the specifics of when we talk about this change in forecasted demand for food in the next 20 or 30 years. So agricultural production is going to have to increase, but also the composition of what we're growing will likely change, because people are going to want to eat things that reflect their taste for a more diversified diet. But consistent with that, and sort of driven by that, there's going to be new pressures on land, on water, on the environment, on labor. That's one that we don't always talk about, and on energy. And then if you sort of throw questions related to climate change and increased variability in weather systems, and perhaps increased severity of certain kinds of weather shocks, then that adds a sort of new unknown to the process that we're thinking about. And so the big challenge here is, how do you do this, right? And how do you do this in a way which is sustainable? So how do you do this in a way that doesn't jeopardize the ability of the next generation to meet their need for food? And I tend to work in international development. So this is new for me to start thinking about these kinds of challenges in the United States, but it's one that I'm really excited about. And in the work that I've done in other countries, the framework which has been most fruitful, and I think is gaining a lot of traction, in a really substantive way is trying to understand the whole system in a way that's really specific. So to understand production and understand what the relationships are in terms of contracts and sort of resource constraints between production and processing, and the involvement of distribution and marketing, and then getting into the consumer side, so preparation and consumption, and trying to close the loop, right, on energy and natural resource use. So I think that there's really exciting opportunities here related to taking this kind of a food system approach to thinking about closing the loop, meeting future demand in a way that's intensifying as opposed to extensifying, and sustainable. So Joseph, do you want to pick up? Yeah.
Sure. Yep. I would like to thank Nancy, Laura, Mike, and Anne for organizing this, and also the participant for spending your time with us this morning. I'm Joseph Malone, and as Hope was talking about those major issues, they are very practical to me. I'm originally from South Sudan, south of Egypt, between Uganda, Ethiopia, Central Africa. And it's just essentially the issue of climate change and the food security is part of my research in that region, and it's real. I went to Sudan about 5 years ago, where I grew up. I just couldn't recognize anything. Everything was dry and very different. And so it's a big threat to the global community, and particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. So just to mention that. And so there are different ways of looking at how to feed the growing population in a way that is sustainable and equitable. It's a big challenge for all of us, including here in the United States. People are thinking about different methods. You know, there are talks about more chemicals to intensify agriculture, growing meat probably in labs and things like that, a variety of different things. But the thing that I'm working on, part of the potential solution is this, what we call community-based food system. And just looking at what we are doing and how we can evaluate and actually making sure that the food we produce satisfy the need of all of us. And food insecurity is not really because of the supply, it's actually an issue of affordability. We are wasting about 30 to 40% of the food that we produce globally. Here in the US, we are wasting about 40% of the food that we produce. So there has to be some kind of efficiency across those food supply chain, so to speak. There are a lot of definitions for food system. Some call local food, community-based food system. That is what I like, and as well as different definition to it. And I tend to like this definition from the University of California at Davis, that defines a sustainable food system as a collaborative network that integrates sustainable food production, processing, distribution, consumption, and waste management in order to enhance the environmental, economic, and health of a particular place. We like to define, because this is a research-based approach to conceptualizing the food. And so we are able to evaluate and measure all those components as we try to change the system. And so food system, we cannot talk about food system without talking about the agriculture itself. And so I see food system as a subset of sustainable agriculture, which is defined, and I hope already did that, defined as an agriculture that satisfies the need of this generation without jeopardizing, without compromising the need of the next generation to come. And so that type of agriculture has to be economically viable. People need to make money, farmers need to make money. Everybody that is involved in that value chain need to make money. And it has to be socially acceptable. In other words, Hope talk about food insecurity and the inequity in food security. And also the way we produce food, making sure that it is actually in line with our values as society. And then it has to be we have to do it in such a way that it doesn't cause any irreversible damage to the environment that support, to the ecosystem that actually support the food system. And so that is the broader outlook. Sometimes we struggle with balancing those components, but given all the things that are going on with the climate, with the population growth, there's a need to think differently and integrate this so that we don't cause any intergenerational injustices. Sure, it has been a lot of growth in the interest in local food that is produced locally, and also people want to know their farmers and what they do, their families, and we have seen growth at the consumer level. We have CSA that has grown. We have farmers market. We have different kind of direct to consumer kind of food relationship at the regional level as well. And we have also farms to institutions, to school, to hospitals, to colleges that are also growing, to restaurants that need to be, tapped into more. So basically, the demand for local food exceeds the supply currently. That is sometimes difficult to see, but that is exactly what the research is showing, that we need to produce more local food to meet the demand for it. And as you can see from the demand for organic food across the world, it has grown since 2002 all the way to 16. Even now, it's still growing. And I just want to mention that this organic also is not only what is produced here in the country, in the United States, but also that it's being imported across the globe. But the bottom line is that there is a demand for it. Also, you can see the farmers market is a very popular market for local food, and it has grown a lot. It's still growing. And this is putting a lot of money into the economy. And so when you look at this picture like this, it is not surprising to see that people are happy because it is not only about shopping for food, but also that element of social connection. As a human, we are social being, and going to the farmer's market is something that people are really looking into every Saturday because they want to interact with other human beings, they want to make connection, and they want to support those farmers as well. And as they finish shopping from that market, you can imagine they would have go around and shop also in the area. And this is called the multiplier effect that I'm going to have, hope again, address from the economic standpoint of that.
Yes, there's a nice sort of simple study that does some calculations showing what the possibility might be in New Hampshire for connecting local buyers with farmers, and sort of outlines, and we can make this available to folks that are interested, that kind of shows how much money is leaving the local economy, and thinks through what would be the implication for employment and for benefits to the local economy to close the loop and to actually sort of directly connect some of these markets locally with farmers. Yeah, so it's a really nice demonstration of that fact.
And so during the COVID-19, we have seen a lot of disruption of local food. I mean, the food chain in general. We were lucky here in the United States that we have not seen it very bad, but some countries that have been following, it has been a huge problem. Countries that depends on import for their food, went through a lot of food insecurity and lack of access to food because of that shock. At the same time, also it created a demand for locally produced food as people became aware of that vulnerability in our food system, and also supporting their neighbors. There has been a growing demand now for locally produced food. And so this is an example from a owner of a small meat processing facility in Awood, Iowa. As a result of that demand, that's what he said, responding to a journalist. Right now, we are booked, sold out, not only for 2021, all the way through 2022. So you can imagine in a place like that where it's booked throughout the next year to process meat. How about if you multiply that? And so as a result of that, the Iowa Economic Authority provided some funding for expansion for this person and another small processing meat company in the area. It's a family business. And so he said in the next sentence, in response to that funding, he said in our community of around 800 people, it is a pretty big deal. So that will take us from around 55 employees to around 70 full-time employees. And so there's a real clear potential for food system especially in rural areas where the population is less and also are struggling to sustain their economy. Big River firm in Minnesota, that's another firm that I've been following, a system that help young and immigrant farmers, providing technical and funding and all the training that they need. And I've been following them, and this is what they say. The pandemic opened a floodgate of interest in CSA. CSA is a community-supported agriculture. The silver lining in 2020, otherwise dark cloud of despair. One lesson from pandemic, local food is better. And there are a lot of examples about how this shock has created that connection between the community and the farmers. So clearly there's an economic implication in this, that especially in rural areas where opportunities for employment are declining, food system, if you scale up, would be another way to address that. And then attract population. We have people who are looking into going to rural areas, and those kind of lifestyle and quality of life, which is part of the food system too, is something that attracts a lot of people from urban to rural areas. And then the social connection part of this, as I mentioned in that slide, when you go to a farmer's market, you are looking into a lot of things that make you happy. And so social connection is a big part of food system. It is a very relational, and it addresses the isolation that we are dealing with. And so food system is a community building kind of thing. Food system also cares about food insecurity. Food insecurity is very pervasive in developing countries, but also here in the United States. And this is how it is defined. It's not only that we have access to food and eat, but also that food has to be nutritious, has to be safe. It has to be within your preference. It has to be a kind of food that you like to eat. Some people think that should not be part of this definition, but I can tell you my example. When I was in Ethiopia, I was a refugee in Ethiopia for 6 years, and I'm a Nilotic person. That our life is based on cattle and growing grain and things like that. We don't eat other things. We don't know how to eat them. And so we had an American agricultural person that came to our camp to kind of teach about agriculture and how we can sustain ourselves. And then he realized, he noticed that we have a lot of frogs, frogs and other type of fish. And then he came in and said, well, you have a lot of food here. Why don't you eat this? That was a big insult for that community, to say that you are too poor to eat a frog, even though that frog is actually a very expensive one. But the culture doesn't accommodate that. So we have that population, 11% population in the US that is food insecure, and people are affected differently by food insecurity. And as you can see right there, if we think about 11%, it's not that much. We think that it's not too much. But when you look at the population that is affected, based on their socioeconomic and socio-demographic, it is shocking. And so you see people who are below the poverty line are almost 35% food insecure. You look at the single mothers, almost 20-something%, and then you look at the race. The Black and the Hispanic also are highly affected. So it's not 11%, but there are also some population that are really suffering from food insecurity in the country. And so let's just talk about, okay, so food system, is expensive, people cannot afford it, is, elitist ideas and all that. Well, food system also look at the way to address that, because it's part of that. It has to be socially acceptable. And part of that is to try to produce food in areas close to neighborhoods that are not able to afford that food. And if we think about the lost food too, if we can come up with a system where we can go to the farm, to the local food production, and actually rescue the food that is getting bad, we could feed a lot of people. But this type of farming, the urban agriculture and community gardening, is a way also to address food insecurity for those who cannot afford it. And not only addressing in terms of consumption, but also teaching people about where food comes from, how does it grow, what does it do to your body. That kind of relationship with food is also very critical, because some of this community have never seen food growing before. Along that, also our farmers are retiring every day. And we have less people getting into farming because it's a very complex and very difficult business today, and people don't make much money out of it. But we have encouraging trends that we are seeing young people of color, women, immigrants, LGBTQ+, all this, different category of people who are getting into farming. Some of these people don't have any background in farming, but they just, for whatever reasons, they decide to go and find some place in the rural areas and farm. And they are mostly mission-driven kind of agricultural businesses or practices. They are not only looking for money, but they want that kind of lifestyle where they can produce food and be with the nature. And also the justice part of food is also a big deal. But it's not easy for this group. They have a lot of challenges in accessing land, financial capital, startup capital, technical support, all those issues that other farmers who are well established can manage very quickly. But this group is having a lot of problem with establishing themselves, and so the market as well. Now, the biggest question is, it's very easy to talk about this. The big question is, how do we do it? Who is responsible for really doing this, the community-based food system? It's all of us. And I'm not going to talk about the community capital framework, but I just want to show that for the food system to be established and successfully operate in any place, it needs the entire community capital. Everybody should be a part of this, and bring in anything that you can have, so that we have, all of us, it's a win-win for everyone. And I want to point out that the key to starting, and this is a research-based framework, the key for starting this, connecting this, or transforming this capital is social capital, where is relationship. If you go to any conference, anything about food system, it is about relationship. And that relationship can transform the other capital so that you can get all the things that you want that is placed in the middle of that capital. If you are interested in community capital framework, let's set up some time. I'll be happy to define and help out how it could work for your community. And so extension has a role in this. And we have been doing this. We have educators across the country, in our state in Illinois, that are doing a variety of things. So our focus areas are community capacity building, economics, whether it is access to financial or business management. We provide education in environment, food, and health. Basically, the entire ecosystem that support human life. Late last year, we got a grant from the university, and hope myself and 3 colleagues, account-based educators colleague, got a grant that we're going to use to work with. I'm going to speed up here, to work with young and beginning farmers in Northern Illinois, those counties. We'll be working with them. We're going to be making connection with them. We're going to be learning about their systems, their issues, their opportunities, their anything that they do to support their operations. And the idea is that from that knowledge, we could develop a more effective educational programming and connecting them to resources. And so with that, we anticipate a lot of things. These are just things that we think will happen, but there could be also more than this, including even using this to develop another program that can expand and scale up food system in secure and rural areas. That is our team. If you want to contact any of us to pursue this more, we will be happy to talk with you and go from there. I think that is the end of it. Hope, do you have any addition?
No, I mean, I think, I started thinking a lot about some of these issues in a different way this year during COVID and all the discussions and the observations that people had about the food system. And, I think it exhibited enormous resilience, but also some real structural challenges. So I feel like that circumstance sort of gives a different kind of a urgency or relevance to this work that I think about a lot. So.
Okay, great. And I do have references that I didn't put all of them here, but also if you are looking for references and things like that, I will be glad to share with you, including some models like, Cultivate Kansas is a well-recognized program that was, it's kind of a public-private partnership where they work together and develop a very robust food system to feed their communities. So I'm going to turn it back to Nancy or Mike.
Sure, Joseph. Did you want to look at the group questions?
Or also,
do a quick breakout exercise with the participants?
Okay, great. Yep. So with that, I would like to use this part of this time to get you into a group and let's talk about your experiences and involvement in food system and share some of the challenges that you may be facing or that you think will be obstacle to you during your food development in your community, and also provide some options for solutions in your group. We'll come back and discuss this, give you some 10 minutes to discuss in your group, and then let's come back and convince and share ideas. And then if you have any question after that, then we will be talking, we'll be talking about that. But again, everybody in this webinar, I'm sure is experts in this. We all eat, and we are looking forward to learn from you as well.
Perfect. So I'm going to randomly assign these breakout rooms to about 8 people per room. You're going to be able to unmute yourself, spend about 10 minutes in there. We'll broadcast these questions into the rooms, as well as a little bit of instruction. That instruction is that feel free to come back and enter any thoughts into the main chat. And if you are to enter in any thoughts that you have in the group chat, those won't be saved for everyone to see. And I'll reiterate that in the instructions. Okay, so I'm assigning those now. Okay, so Joseph, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you if you'd like to perhaps prompt the participants to continue a discussion. And Mike, if you'd like to guide people when the time is right through the Q&A. It looks like we have an issue with muting. Joseph, you're muted.
Oh my God, I'm talking all this time, so sorry about that. Yeah, any group that want to share what they talked about in relation to those questions? The issue, your involvement, the issue, and potential solutions.
I can start that. We had a brief discussion where we were talking about the degree to which some local food systems that folks in our session were a part of were sustainable because they required a lot of free labor, so that they were built on volunteer labor or donated labor, uncompensated labor, and that there was that was identified as a challenge to their secure continuation, because that was such an important input into the system. So a couple of people mentioned that. I thought that was a really interesting point.
Yep, and labor issue came up a lot during the COVID. It's still going on, where people, essential workers, had to work because we have to have access to food, and then a lot of people die, especially in the meatpacking plant. And when we talk about the social acceptability of community food systems, that's exactly that. And most of those, essential workers don't even afford, to buy food as well. Another group?
We have one comment here that a couple of comments coming in. One group's conversation was about the labor required to provide food through food banks, how those sources of labor were unsustainable.
Or can you say the labor are unsustainable?
Yeah, how those sources of labor feeding or supplying food banks. Our conversation was about the labor required to provide food through food banks, how those sources of labor were unsustainable.
Yep, the burnout, and this is the issue with that when I show the community capital framework. And so a community by definition is a group of people with some common share of destiny, and they are tied by relationship. Those are key elements. There are a lot of definitions, but those are the key elements of community. So having a community that is tied by relationship and able to talk and discuss their issues, having some, way to know what is going on. It comes back to that, that somehow there's somebody somewhere that can come and do something, but if they're not connected, then we have that issue. I know from my work, you have 10 people that go to meeting, to anything in that community, and everybody else is just not there. So what is the issue? Are they aware of this need? So going back to our resources as community, when we talk about the communicative framework, we are thinking about using any potential resources that we have. Sometimes it is we look at the money, the financial capital is a big deal, but we forget about all those 6 capital, including our political capital, and how we can harness them to address that. Again, relationship. I mean, building in a community development. I'm a community development person, and I approach my programming based on that. That community are not powerless. They are not, a passive recipient of anything. Every community, they have resources. The issue is how do they tap and organize and recognize and utilize those resources to address their needs.
Another comment is that Peoria has had great success with anchor institutions running community gardens and approaching the issue of food as medicine. As an element contributing to sustainability, the coordination among agencies is facilitated by community foundation funding as well.
Yeah.
And the unifying element would be treating food as medicine and a factor in well-being.
So what does that mean? What are the specifics of how that works? Like, is it just shifting a framework, or does that have more kind of specific strategies associated with it?
That'd be a good question if Kathy would.
So food as medicine, our hospital today, I've dealt with hospitals in my previous work who are really pushing, even health insurance companies, pushing for healthy eating, food, for local food, for community garden and things like that. And they were putting a little bit of some money into how to organize it. But what was lacking all the time was that connection. Everybody's running, their own way, and then the system are not connected. And so my job was to bring people together and visualize what they want to see in their community, and then look at the resources that they have so that they can make collective impact. So food as a medicine, actually, in some places, they prescribe people, doctor prescribe local food, go to the farmer's market and buy this, and they have a brochure to do that. But the hospital in the hospital too, they contract their food with some other companies that wouldn't allow any food that is produced locally, or somehow they have some, safety and all the things that you could think about to block that process. Community need to have that discussion and say, well, this is what we want to do. But there are some businesses for their economic benefit that are standing on the way. It is possible that we could say we want our kid to eat 10% of the food in school from our food that we produce. Yeah, and we're going to produce it safely. We could do that as a community. It is possible. I mean, when you look at the framework, everything is possible. But again, you want that leadership. You want that everybody is, having that vision of what. And there are models too. It's not only, I'm not saying from it's not my opinion. There are models that you can look at. You can look at the grow, cultivate Kansas. There are models in Colorado, Adams County, in Arizona, Maricopa counties. There are even in Illinois. I'm not aware of Illinois, but there are a lot of models, very successful. But somehow there's no force around it to scale it up.
There are a lot of very rich comments being provided out of the groups, and probably more than we're going to have time to get to today. But in looking at one in particular, one group talked about the need for more education to encourage local food adoption, the cost-benefit proposition of utilizing local food sources, people's need to know how to use certain foods and recipes and cooking techniques. Do those models that you've referred to, do they incorporate an educational component that's pushing this kind of service out to the public generally? Is that a role for extension?
Well, something like that is a community-wide. You look at the cooking. We talk about that in our group too. I was sharing an example in our group where we had in a food pantry, we got mangoes lying there, and people didn't know what to do with it. They don't know how to eat mangoes. Okay, it's not a bad thing. They haven't seen it before. Like when I share my example about frogs, but there could be, there should be some way for people to be exposed to that. And so when I think about that, Mike, I always think about when we think about the theory of social change in general. Okay, they are one of them is institutional. We could change society through our institution and through policy. We could, it could, sometimes it is through a crisis like the COVID-19, but even those crises, you have to take advantage of them. They will not change our system by themselves. But we can use them to change things, to change the thing that we have been trying to change for a long time. Like, for example, the demand because of COVID-19, can we now put money now and actually, kind of scale up and make that cultural shift. We'll have to see that. But unless we do it differently, it's going to be the same result. We'll be spinning ourselves. And so there has to be some aggressive way to do this, even at the school. Either cooking at school, either any kind of getting people into cooking, and that is also meaning struggling with companies that tell us that we don't need to cook because they can cook for us.
One quick note. At this time, we've got a quick poll question for the attendees. Would really appreciate it if you'd take a second when we get that poll question up to provide some answers. And I see one more topic left. Well, a comment that has been shared that another important piece to access for healthy, fresh food for low-income individuals is the incentive programs available in some areas for using your SNAP benefits at the farmer's market. In the models that you've seen, how much of the impetus, how much of the funding, the support is coming from governmental agencies, and how much is coming more from more entrepreneurially oriented private sector players?
Mike, can you repeat that question very quick?
Oh, sure. I was noting that SNAP, noting the comment that an important piece of access to healthy, fresh food for low-income individuals is the incentive programs available in some areas for using SNAP benefits at farmers markets. Now those kinds of regulatory accommodations tend to be coming from the governmental agencies that are involved. Right. How much of the incentive for embracing local food systems is coming as a result of that governmental programming, and how much of it is coming from entrepreneurially oriented private sector players?
Yep, I know we're out of time. Hope I didn't give you any chance. Sorry, I was.
That's okay. No, I think that's that's a really good question. Yeah.
And taking advantage of that, I know some places where they had the SNAP, but they didn't have anywhere to redeem the SNAP money. So they lose, actually. Some places where they only redeem about 30% of the SNAP benefit that they had because there was no access. So those are the thing that, community can look, there are a lot of things from USDA that we could use. But again, having that, that leadership and having that knowing what is going on and how you could actually use that for your own benefits. If you have that money, SNAP money, why don't we use it? So that farmers can get that dollar.
Good. I can see that there's a lot to this topic that we could spend a lot more time covering, but unfortunately, we've run up against the end of our hour. On behalf of the University of Illinois Extension and Rural Partners, I'd like to thank you, Hope and Joseph, for this very informative exercise today, this very, very informative presentation. As I mentioned earlier, the attendees will receive the presentation materials and a link to the recording for this webinar in a follow-up email. You can also, please remember, always visit our website to check out our future webinar offerings and to register for them at go.illinois.edu/LGE. Finally, we thank all of you for participating today. We appreciate your attendance at the webinar. Have a great day, and we hope to see you back for future presentations. Thanks, and bye-bye.